Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. As world leaders cross the world to attend the APEC meeting in Peru, the G20 Summit in Rio, and COP29 in Azerbaijan, the voice of the Global South has never been more vital. At all of these gatherings, developing nations are fighting to get their voices heard and pushing to create new forms of global governance. We've had a lot of talk in the past week, but what does the rise of the Global South really look like in practice? Joining me now are Alicia García-Herrero, Senior Fellow at Bruegel and Chief Economist for Asia Pacific at Natixis, and Zhiguang, Professor of International Politics at Fudan University. Great to see both of you on the agenda. Yin, let's start with you, because as world leaders are gathering at APEC and at the G20 meeting, and of course at COP, what we've got here is a world that's going through enormous change. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I mean, change is always a good thing. I strongly believe movement is the sole driving force for the shaping of a world order. And particularly considering nowadays, the change that happened all across the road really seems to have the tendency of building the world towards a true multilateral order. So yeah, in a nutshell, it is a good thing.
But there is a lot of uncertainty, isn't there, Alicia? And I'm wondering where you see that coming from. Is it geopolitical tensions? Is it the continuing legacy of supply chain squeezes and economic strain after the pandemic? I mean, where do you see the pressure points being?
Well, I think a new global order is, of course, a good thing. I fully agree, but in a way, we need to design it in a way that everybody is on board, because if not, it's asymmetric, which is what's happening. Asymmetric multipolarity, which we're heading towards, will not necessarily benefit everybody. Yeah, there will be some areas of global governance dominated by certain powers, whether it's the West, or whether it's Southeast Asia, maybe more China-centric, or whether it's India, South Asia, whether, it's... So I think it is very important, as you said, the pressure points to be basically discussed in the open and make sure that those pressure points are tackled before we actually jump in a new global order.
Well, you talk about getting everybody on board. I mean, Yin, what do you think it's all saying then about the rise of the Global South? And how can, as China's President Xi put it, the voice of the Global South be amplified?
Well, I mean, the focal point of China's envisioning of the world order would be focusing on empowering the Global South on the economic front. And for this time, the APEC theme, I believe, manifests, it holds Peru's agenda quite strongly. You can see that Peru wants to integrate its informal economy and transform it into a much more sort of a formal style of economy, and Peru wants to have a more say in its economic and global order by developing its own economic infrastructure and many other aspects. And this cannot be done without, first, a true diverse input of developmental capital, a true diversity in terms of global trade, and a true sort of a momentum that could enable economies such as Peru to develop itself on its own. So in a nutshell, modernization, development by echoing everybody's concern and transforming places such as APEC, such as BRICS and COPs into a true multilateral international format, a platform to address everybody's concern. And that would be the starting point.
You're making me think now of the APEC 2024 tagline in Peru: empower, include, grow. Alicia, what did you take that to mean?
Well, it means that for Peru to really be empowered, two things have to happen. I think asymmetrical multipolarity, again, going back to my point before, is part of the answer, but not fully, because Peru will never be really a regional power. We need to realize that, and I'm sure Peru knows that in and out. So for Peru to really be empowered, we need to keep a multilateral order, maybe change it, maybe reform it, but we cannot move to basically regional powers, because Peru will have less of a say that it might even have today. So, we really need to think this through, so that countries that are smaller, that are very dependent on commodities, the case of Peru, really still can be protected by the multilateral global order, whether it's the WTO, the World Trade Organization, or other multilateral organizations. So before we change all of that, we need to make sure we have an alternative, so that even smaller countries have a say.
Now, Yin, China's President Xi was in Peru for APEC. He's heading off to Brazil for G20. What do you think that tells us about China's enthusiasm about the Latin American region and for its relationships with the rest of the global south?
Well, I think that the sheer fact that China is very enthusiastic about multilateral international institutions such as APEC, which reflects not only South-South cooperation, but North-South dialogue, BRICS, and WTO as well, and in addition to all of these, United Nations. It shows that I would echo Alicia's point. China is quite enthusiastic about building a true multilateral world by utilizing all multilateral, multinational, international organizations. And I believe that reflects one of the basic ontological issues. China doesn't really believe in power politics. And building a world that is truly democratic would need us to think differently than the conventional power politics ideals, and it requires us to create some new platforms, some new initiatives that truly empowers not only small and weak countries in the region, but multilateral organizations which can create a platform for small nations across the world to work together.
We're talking about doing things differently. The organisers at APEC 2024 were saying they wanted to think about consolidating a new approach to economic cooperation. Alicia, have they done that, do you think?
Well, it's very hard to do that. So let's put it this way. I mean, we are in that process, but of course, the world is changing. Yeah, we have U.S. elections that doesn't necessarily bode well for such cooperation. I think a lot of things will have to evolve in the light of those elections. And yes, hopefully we'll have that cooperation. I'm just saying it's getting harder, but that's how the world evolves. We'll find a way.
But there's a lot of cooperation and collaboration and partnerships that are already taking place, Alicia. I mean, in Peru, the ribbon was cut on the Chancay megaport, that $1.3 billion commercial hub that's going to really open up regional trade opportunities. China's shipping company, COSCO, owns 60% of that project, and it's a crucial part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. How important is that, and what other investments do you think that might lead to?
Well, it is, of course, very important. It's very positive for Peru to be basically put in a map of major ports, but it has to be an open port. It has to be for everybody, and that's crucial for Peru to benefit from that port. And I'm sure that will be the case because it makes sense for everybody, to have an open port. So I would say that would probably lead to additional regional trade through that port. And that is very, very welcome because the region, as everybody knows, actually lacks regional trade. It's mostly, about the US or China for that matter. And now the question is, can this port help regional trade booming? which the region needs.
And what do you think that then says about the Belt and Road Initiative, the opportunities, where this might take us?
Well, I mean, Belt and Road has been in place for many, many years, and the existing cases and the existing Chinese practices shows that China has always operating on first, a no-interventionist principle, and secondly, it's not exclusive. So I believe what Alicia is calling for and is envisioning an open port, that would be definitely the case. And it has been the case in many other places where Belt and Road Initiatives has had their projects. So I strongly believe that what China is promoting at the moment would provide a true alternatives and choices for the global South country, and having the opportunity to choose can really bring forward the global South's concern of development, growth, and most importantly, empowerment. Because for a long time, the global South countries has been suffering from the problem of not having enough choice, from monopolization. And that's exactly the case where the Latin American economists in the 1950s and 60s were concerning about turning Latin America's economy fully into a dependent economy. And dependency is the fruit of monopolization. Yeah. And nowadays, with China's promotion of a choice, it really, I believe, creates a new momentum for the movement of the world.
So we're talking about the choices and the voices of the global South. And as Alicia mentioned, all of this is against the backdrop of these meetings which are taking place in the wake of Donald Trump's victory in the US elections. As he heads back to the White House, to what extent do you think that the US has maybe lost its regional clout with the global South?
I sincerely hope not, but the world doesn't really flow according to my own will. But surely the global, as I said, the world order is constantly in flux. It's a movement in its own. So the recently finished US election with Trump as the next president-elect, the world will surely react towards that reality accordingly. And but deep down, I still believe that it will be ideal for the entire world if there is choices. And having said that, if the US decide to move towards a conventional way of monopolization, of US first, of utilizing the American interest over the other nation's interests, then surely the world will move against this particular trend of monopolization. It has always been like that.
Let's pause there for a moment. And Alicia, thank you for your time. But Zhiguang, do stay with us, as still to come here on the agenda, saving the planet. What role can the global South play in creating a greener world?
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to the agenda. And let's continue our discussion now on the rise of the global South. Still with me, Zhiguang, Professor of International Politics at Fudan University. And now we're also joined by Erik Solheim, former Under-Secretary General of the UN and former head of the UN Environment Programme. Erik, of the major powers in the global South, who stands out? Or does it depend on what we're talking about, if it's trade, if it's innovation or education?
Well, two powers in the global South really stands out. One, of course, is China. The other is India. they stand out because of the sheer size. I mean, both are 1.4 billion people. India even now a little more. China is, depending on how we measure, the biggest or second biggest economy in the world. India will very soon be the third largest. India and China has nearly all global economic growth. And they have very powerful leaders in Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi, strong leaders with a global vision. So these two stand out. But of course, Indonesia will soon be the fourth biggest economy in the world. Brazil under Lula has a very important role, also to some extent as a bridge between America and Asia. Africa will be doubling its population in the next couple of decades, which will make Nigeria, Ethiopia, South Africa powerful. Turkey under President Erdogan is a very powerful nation, which is friendly to everyone. So there are many more, but if you who stand out, China and India.
Well, you've given me quite a long list, but bearing all of those rising voices that you've got in mind, let's look ahead to the G20 Summit in Rio, because in September, the group's foreign ministers met at the UN to talk about changes in global governance. So what would you say? What are the countries from the global south really pushing for it? Is it just to be heard, or is it something more?
Oh, it's a lot more. I mean, look, the global south is now the growth engine of the global economy. The BRICS countries, which met recently in Kazan, is a much bigger economy than the G7, of course, a much bigger population. And if you look into the future, a much larger chart of the economy in the world will happen in these nations. They are furious that they are not heard, and they're furious that the global system is made 70 years ago in a very different time. Look, the current global system was made when France had colonies in Vietnam, and when India was a part of the British Empire, and when France and the UK, today two middle-sized European countries, were global powers. India is not even on the Security Council. There is no representation for Africa and Latin America, big nations. So they're furious with the lack of reform of the global governing system. They have a double strategy. They want to reform the current system to be more influential in the UN, but they also establish a huge number of new parallel institutions to highlight the role of the global south. BRICS is one. Another one, of course, is Belt and Road, where China is investing in the rest of the developing world. You have the Asia Infrastructure Development Bank, the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, the New Development Bank. There are so many institutions coming because the World Bank and the traditional institutions are not really working well for the global south.
Yeah. And Ewan, what do you think? Is there this double strategy then for the global south ahead of G20?
Yeah, I completely agree with Erik's observation. And the Global South, ever starting from 1945, the Global South country, or you might call it Afro-Asian Solidarity Movement, manifested in a non-aligned movement in G77, in the new international economic order. All those initiatives, they reflect a long striving aspiration from the Global South countries to gain more say in the international arena. But that sort of aspiration needs to be supported by a material development. And this is precisely what the Global South country has always been asking for and has been working towards to really, truly develop itself, transforming its status from being a relatively on the low end of the global economic order, improving its economic condition, improving its social condition, and so that they could be a true equal partner on the global stage. And then they could, through their constant movement action, trying to use international platform to manifest, to make the international platforms to manifest, to reflect the Global South countries' real developmental concerns concern and needs, such as human rights concern, developmental concern, and environmental concerns. All of these, they have managed over the years to put through international cooperation, reflected particularly on the UNDP or UNCTAD platforms as such. But nowadays, we do have more international platforms as such. As Erik just mentioned, COP29 is one, BRICS Plus is one, and of course, APEC, G20, all of these, they are part of the bigger political and economic aspiration of the Global South, striving for equal and more cooperative international order.
Erik, what about climate leadership? I mean, COP29 continues. Nothing groundbreaking has come out of it so far. But how pivotal a moment is this for emerging voices from the Global South?
Look, people here in Baku are furious. I mean, the one nation which has done the most to cause the climate problem now is telling the rest of the world, oh no, we leave it to you to sort out the mess we have made. United States emissions up to today are 8 times the Chinese per capita, 25 times the Indian per capita. And if we compare to Africa, the difference is even bigger. And now the United States is saying, we do not intend to sort out these problems we have caused. We leave it to the rest of the world to solve it. But the good news is China, India, and the rest of the Global South are acting. And China is now the indispensable nation for the green transformation, not the United States. China, 60% of solar, wind, hydropower, electric batteries, electric cars, metros, high-speed rail, whatever you can mention. China last year produced 2/3 of all new green energy in the world. The rest of the world was 1/3. India is also, by the way, moving very, very fast on the environment, and so is Indonesia. So that when the United States is abandoning the leadership, will others step up to take that lead role and transform the world into a green economy? But of course, China and India is doing it for themselves, because this is very important to protect the people of India and China. But it's also a very sound economic strategy for both nations, do nation building and green development as one. I mean, President Xi said it very clearly when he said green is gold. If we go green, we will build a stronger China.
But in terms of investments into green technologies, clean technologies, infrastructure, adaptation strategies for developing countries, to what extent does the Global South depend on those richer economies to get the funding to turbocharge the green transition?
But I don't think dependent is a appropriate word to describe such a situation. The Global South country, for the entirety of its own history of striving for independence and autonomy, has to rely on some form of cooperation and support. Nowadays, the developmental capital is one of the crucial issues that the Global South countries are all struggling with. So with the coming of China advocating cooperation rather than developmental financing or developmental investment, I guess the key word is cooperation through some form of South-South initiative, such as China will provide 0 to low interest loans to developing countries, and will provide infrastructures of course, fully respect the recipient countries' sovereign will, so that through a cooperative format, a greener and more efficient type of development could be implemented.
And Erik, where do you see that those opportunities are then for South-South cooperation? Is it in traditional sectors like agribusiness, services, manufacturing, entrepreneurship, or something else?
It's all of this. Look, China, as I said, is now the lead nation on everything green, and Chinese companies want to invest abroad, and they should be welcomed, and we should encourage more global investment. I mean, for example, the biggest BYD, which is now the biggest electric car maker in the world, they invest in Brazil, in Turkey, in Uzbekistan, in Thailand, right here in Azerbaijan. and in other developing countries. And through that, of course, they share the technology with these nations. That's exactly the same as China did the opposite way in the past. I mean, China received technology from many Western nations, and then they turned it into their own and did better. Quite recently, I visited CATL, which is now the biggest electric battery maker in the world, and they had only praise for BMW, telling me that in the early days of CATL, BMW was the German car maker was so important for them to share the technology and drive the development of CATL. Now CATL is the world leader, and they should share their technologies with the rest of the world through investments. And then we will see a much greener world coming very fast.
OK, so there's lots of talk, and from what you're telling me, there's lots of action happening too, maybe not at the fast pace that all of the big voices would be encouraging. But Yin, in spite of all of these meetings that are taking place, that gap between the global north and the global south just only seems to be getting wider. What is it really going to take to create a truly multipolar world?
Well, I mean, I guess the global south, on their path of strive, the long history of the global south countries striving for its true autonomy and independence, cooperation is one of the biggest solutions that they imagined. The same principle, I guess, would apply to the north-south cooperation and dialogue. To be honest, I think I completely agree with what Erik just said. The change, the transformation has already happened with the China's promotion of the green technology. The global north countries in Europe are actively seeking to benefit from this trend, particularly with the fashion of knowledge sharing, which is also something that the global south country has been advocating for a long time. And the transformation that happens on the ground needs to reflect itself on the global policy-making stage. I guess for the European countries, as part of the global north, the EU, the European countries, needs to acquire its true autonomy and try to be an equal partner as well, not forming some sort of hegemonic alliances, but becoming a true equal partner on the global stage. That I believe in the very near future will help to transform on the global stage the political international order.
Zhiguang, Erik Solheim, thank you both very much. Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.